concerns that have been written. Whitechapel Memorial Park Cemetery is the final resting place of John DeLorean. I went there with my son and granddaughters when they were visiting about 2 weeks ago. They are avid fans of both the DeLorean car and its designer. On the gravestone, we saw that someone had placed a little toy version of the car that was featured in one of my favorite movies, which came out in 1985, Back to the Future. With a title that suggests that time travel is not merely possible, but that there are reasons to go back from the future to the present and back to the future again. And best of all, the time machine was a suitably modified DeLorean. I can still hear Marty, the protagonist, saying to the sort of mad scientist, "You built a time machine out of a DeLorean." And that was a line that has lived with us till today. Even today, a DeLorean seems like something that was from another time. It still is from another time, another universe, with its amazing features. Like those gullwing doors, they didn't just open to the side, they slid open. They slid up and then opened so that no one got hit or anything like that. Unlike with regular car doors, where you sometimes hit another car or, heaven forbid, a person. Since Back to the Future was filmed, there have been many movies exploring the melding of future, present, and past, and the way the existence of humans and other living things are intertwined or interrelated with all the aspects of what we call time. There was a recent movie that talks about specifically that. It's called Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And you may have seen that. It's about that interrelationship. It's getting to this intertwining of things and times in several parallel universes, which we also call the multiverse, and I think that's what it's called in the film. And the character in this film, a Chinese woman who's an immigrant, is connecting with herself in parallel universes in order to stop a powerful being from destroying that multiverse and all of existence. So it's quite a deep story. Now, of course, astrophysicists have been working on theories explaining that time is not just a linear progression of moments, minutes, and so on. And that there is something like a time-space continuum, but that's folded in on itself in mysterious ways that are much more complicated than what I'm capable of talking about today or any other day. But what is fascinating to me is that philosophers have come up with similar ideas. And I'm specifically thinking about a Japanese philosopher, Dogen Zenji. He, you may or may not know, was the founder of Soto Zen in Japan. And he got some ideas from his visits to China. He wrote about these ideas in the very beginning of the 13th century, ages ago. He wrote about a concept that in the Sino-Japanese language of that time was called uji. U U-J-I, a very short word, uji, but a very complicated set of ideas are related to it. The literal translation of uji is time being. It's usually written as time/being, because we don't really have a word in English that encompasses the two together, uji. So the idea is that things in the world do not exist in time, they are time. I have a hard time even now, after I've spent 2 years reading Master Dogen's famous book. It's called the Shobogenzo. I never quite can wrap my head around it, but I'm trying. The idea is that each moment contains the whole universe. So there are not separate moments, they all flow one into the other. Each moment is fluidly connected to the present, the past, and the future. Now, since Dogen wrote these very enigmatic words over the centuries, many philosophers have tried to figure out what that concept of uji really means. And they have come up with translations that are much closer to something that I can understand with my limited capabilities. Some of these translations simplify the idea, and they argue it means something like at one point, or on one occasion, or something like, and then one day, or even once upon a time, or for the time being. All these things I can relate to. I'm starting to think of fairy tales now, where there are a lot of maybes that are explored. Or they see it as a signal that an important event is about to happen. Now, honestly, I think they're trying to get away from the difficult stuff, but that's okay, because that's good for us today. So time, I think, is put together with something significant that is happening or that could be happening. And simply looking at our society today, I think there is something like parallel universes in US society and in politics, where there's a large group of people who desire to go back to the past, and another group of people who desire to go back to the kind of future that was envisaged in the 1960s. So in a way, they desire to go back to the future, but it's a future that was seen in the past. I'm beginning to get some of these ideas now. So what does this all mean for people like us today, who are figuring out practically on a daily basis how to live our values every day, how to incorporate 7 principles or 6 values that are centered on love? When do we do this? How do we do it? How long do we do it? And how is time relevant in all this? Time is not mentioned in the principles or in the values. So it's subsumed, it's woven in there somehow. Maybe it's in the part that relates to interrelationship and interdependence. If you deconstruct that and puzzle that out, maybe that's where it is. So I thought I would maybe just make it even simpler and look at a couple of ways, and I'm going to pick 4, in which one can let go of the notion that time is this progression of chunks that are added together successively, and that significant things we do are neatly lined up with these chunks of time. It's kind of like the resumes that many of us prepare when we apply for jobs. I remember doing such things. I always felt that each slot had to have something that I had done that was significant. So sometimes I had to stretch that a little bit to make that come out. You know how that works. So the first thing I was thinking about is that something interesting is happening to the length of people's lives, at least in societies like ours. People live longer on average, and that makes us think differently about time and what we do. We can engage in practices that take up huge amounts of time. Well, raising children is one of those. But also, learning a language and communicating with more people in a widening circle of concern is possible. Now, learning languages is either something we do when we're very young, or it is something that takes many decades and we never really get good at it. My son, who I just mentioned, had gone with us to the cemetery over there. He also said, oh, this is a good time. We're talking 2 weeks here. This is a good time for you to teach my children the languages you know. And I thought, you gotta be kidding me, you know, because he was talking about German, Dutch, and French. And I said, sure. Actually, we managed a few words and how they translate in these different languages, and that's how far we got. Other things also take a lifetime of practice. Being a Unitarian Universalist, for example. Yeah, can I just read a short list of the UU values? Yes, I can. And then say, okay, I get it. Well, that's already more difficult. You cannot just say, oh, I get it, no problem. No, that doesn't work, probably. But implicitly, I'm thinking of something like, yes, for the time being, at this point, or one day I will maybe be able to be good at this. So I am really applying this idea that time and things of importance to me are connected in some way, maybe in complicated ways. So that's one thing I was thinking about. And the second thing that came to me is that when we're thinking about doing good in the world, we often refer to this as building the beloved community. Some actions make a huge difference and yet take only little time to accomplish. I'm thinking of Rosa Parks sitting in the bus. You know, there are these moments that are really significant. Others take much longer, and it seems like they take forever. But that does not mean we should not do them. When the goal seems far away, there are small steps that can be taken to prepare the ground for the bigger goal. And this idea is really what is encompassed in this way of thinking in ethics that we call an ethic of risk. Some of us may think, why do this? It's not going to make a difference. But it does. We lay the groundwork. And we might not know yet what's going to come out of it, but the groundwork becomes a more solid way for others to continue the work and eventually maybe reach a goal. It's something that's not always done with that great social justice goal on the horizon. But sometimes there's another goal, and I was also thinking about Project 2025, which has components that were already being proposed when I was working for a commission called the Minimum Wage Study Commission in Washington, D.C. That was around 1980, a long time ago. And that's where I first became aware of this foundation called the Heritage Foundation. That foundation and its associates were busily planning to do things like privatizing Social Security or getting rid of it altogether, getting rid of minimum wage protections and other such things that would fit in a long-term project like that. So this has indeed been going on for at least half a century. So I was thinking about that. But then a third point I was thinking about is that one is never too old or too young to do a good thing. Maybe. In my own life, I started doing social activism when I was a teenager in school in Belgium. And those schools were rather strict, and I was almost kicked out of school because of it. And luckily, one of my co-conspirators was somebody whose mother worked in a very important job in the Ministry of Education. Without that, I would not have gotten a high school diploma, I can tell you. So that was a nice coincidence right there. Also, as you mostly know, I went to study in seminary for the ministry at an age when retirement seemed a more appropriate use of my time being. And my children sort of reminded me of that. And I thought, well, luckily, you don't get to tell me what to do. But there was that. And I'm sure that many or most of us can think of something we did or do that doesn't quite fit in the proper time when we would be expected to do them, like protesting, writing books, and other interesting things. But there are people like the Swedish activist Greta Thunberg and the Pakistani activist Malala Yousafzai, who received the Nobel Prize at the age of 17. She was is the youngest Nobel Prize recipient ever, 17. And people like that are great role models for us who think that they may be too young. And then there are those like Anthony Fauci, who is 83 years old and a great role model for those who might think they are too old to engage in social activism. No, never too old. And I was also thinking of a fourth way in which we can break that direct link between time that is progressing in neat little increments and the significant actions we may engage in, where we do little when we're small people, and then hopefully a lot when we're adults, and then it peters off, that's sort of the expectation. But no, that's not necessarily the only way to think about it. And one thing we might think about is to pay it forward, a term that we also use a lot. Paying forward that good deed, that investment somebody made in our education. That's another way in which people contribute to making a better society for all of us. The effects may be way off into the future, or there may be a jump in time and it happens very quickly, but these effects are here and they matter. So may we be able to see how we can think of time in a way that is more fluid than merely seeing it as a tick-tock way in which things happen at different moments in time, and in which we often say, we're out of time, we can't do that. And in that way, we might be more able to live our Unitarian Universalist values and put our actions together with these values, regardless of how time plays a role. The things we hold fast to, the things we do are what counts, no matter how they relate in convoluted ways to this concept that we call time. And may it be so. Let us rise in body or spirit and turn to our closing hymn. It is number 86 in the